welcome back to another episode of Federico Talks Watches. Now today I want to talk about a subject that's actually quite complicated, and that is buying vintage watches. What do you have to look out for? Do I have any tips or tricks? This has been overwhelmingly a question that's been emailed to me. And honestly, the waters of buying vintage watches are pretty murky, and it really comes down to experience. So this is more of a beginner's guide, but I did put together some universal tips that I think you guys should use when trying to buy vintage that could really help you out. Now, of course, before we get started, customary wristwatch check. Today, in honor of this video, I'm wearing my vintage Atlantic Worldmaster, one of the coolest pieces in my collection, and it's absolutely vintage. It's got that great patina on the dial, and I've been meaning to take it off an needle strap for a while, but I haven't gotten around to buying a lizard for it. I kind of want to wear it as my Art Deco kind of dress watch. But it's a fantastic piece, fully mechanical, manual wind, something I picked up on the vintage market that I'm really, really happy to have as part of my collection. But vintage is something that really takes a lot of experience because there's a lot of ways where you guys can get burned. So why don't we get into a few tips to help you kind of make the right decisions when buying vintage watches. Now, the first tip is history. Let's say you guys are browsing the time zone for sale section or eBay and you come across a really cool vintage watch. The first thing you should do is Google it, of course, and find its history. The source is really important as well. Now, I do most of my research on the time zone forums, militarywatchresource.com, Purist Pro, or brand particular forums. Like if it's a vintage Rolex, check out rolexforums.com. This is just a time-consuming process. There's no easy trick to it, but try and get the model number of the watch you have and do some research and read up on it. And of course, make sure that the source is credible. A site like Military Watch Resource has been around for a while, but if it's on a forum, make sure that you read all the posts and that the people replying to the posts have a lot of engagement and have been on that forum for a while, so you can kind of trust what they have to say. So the first step is always research. Secondly, I would take a look at the provenance. Does the watch have a story? Does it have an engraving? If the watch is from, let's say, the 60s, but it's got an engraving that says Merry Christmas 1948, then you know it's probably a fake. Or let's say you're looking at a vintage Rolex sub, but it's got a Luminova dial. Now you know that Luminova wasn't made in that time period, so it probably has Franken parts. Frankenstein is a watch made up of many different watch parts. So stuff like that. And also another part of provenance is, where's the watch coming from? Is it a reputable dealer? Now, if you buy a watch from eBay, you have to look at the country. For example, a lot of watches coming from India, Argentina, and the Philippines are known to be Franken watches. Does that mean every watch from this country or from these countries are no good? No, it doesn't mean that, but it should set off a red flag because a lot of these fake or faux vintage come from these countries. Also, you could save yourself a lot of headache by just going to a dealer. Someone like my buddy Christian at theoharris.com, he doesn't even know I'm mentioning him in this video, is a guy that does a lot of research for you. Sure, you might pay a slightly higher price, but it's researched, it's serviced, and it's good to go, and you know what you're getting. So provenance is definitely a big deal. Another tip is price. Vintage is a place where you can get some great deals. But of course, I'd rather spend a little bit more and be fully convinced of the watch I'm getting than getting a fantastic deal. Have I gotten fantastic deals in the past? Sure I have. This Atlantic being one of them. But that's because I was fully convinced that the watch wasn't a Franken or wasn't, redialed. And that brings me up to my other point, and that is Franken and redials. As I said, a Franken watch is a watch that's made from many different parts, original, non-original, or from many different eras. So of course, you need to look them up. And the only way you can really tell this stuff is either through a ton of research or from experience. So I'm sorry guys, there's no shortcuts here. Take a look at the back of the movement. Do all the parts look like they've aged equally? That's a big sign. Does the movement look like it needs a service? If it does need a service, can you get parts for it? All these are questions you should answer. And another huge deal is redials, dials that have been repainted to make them look original. Now, for example, my Atlantic, the dial is nowhere near is nowhere near perfect. It's got a very big patina on it, but that's the charm of vintage. But a lot of people clean these dials up or repaint them to kind of make them look brand new. And in the vintage watch world, that's a huge no-no. It brings down the value enormously because it's no longer original. Now, how can you tell a redial? This is a question that's been asked to me very, very frequently. And honestly, the only real way to tell is through experience. But one tip is if the logos look slightly sloppy. Usually, if there's too much paint on the dial or if the edges of the text aren't crisp, that's a sign of a redial. I'll put a picture right up here so you guys can take a look. But honestly, unless you guys have looked at hundreds of dials and you've been doing this for a while, there's no real way to tell. Unless, of course, it's blatant and the dial doesn't belong in that watch. But I would honestly say, as a rule of thumb, to stay away from redials. Their value is worth nowhere near what, the watch would have been with an original dial, and it's usually looked down upon in collector circles. So even though you've got a fantastic redial, and the watch might look great, I probably wouldn't buy one. And of course, my last tip is to ask for help. Shoot an email to a watch collector friend. Post a picture of it on the Urban Gentry Watch Club Facebook group, or maybe on the forums. If you're not an expert, don't be scared of reaching out, because in vintage, there's so many different aspects to each watch that you can never get everything right. I mean, unless the watch is a couple $100 and you really don't care, fine, I totally get that. But when going higher end vintage, you really need a trained eye, especially if you're not an expert yourself. And this can be quite daunting because it could be the difference from getting a decent deal to the difference of getting completely burned. And as I said in another tip previously, if you're not an expert, it's probably best to just go with a reputable dealer. Someone like Theo and Harris, Matthew Bain, even your local AD might have a vintage section. Sometimes you'll pay a little bit of a premium, but at least you can be guaranteed to be getting most of the time, if it's an honest dealer, and the ones I listed should be, or generally are considered to be very honest, you'll be getting what is listed and you don't have to worry about it. So as you can see, the vintage watch collecting circles, it's pretty complicated, but it can be very, very rewarding, especially if you're one of those guys where the hunt is more fun than the purchase. And I know it is for me. I love researching this stuff, making sure I'm getting a good deal, finding out about the history of the watch and learning what makes it unique. That's kind of a big part of the fun for me. So, that's not a problem for me. But if you just want to buy it and get it out of the way, there's other ways to do it. Guys, I know this guide is very basic, but unfortunately when it comes to the vintage watch market, experience really is the only real way to know. And even the most experienced people get burned sometimes. But hopefully you found a few of these tips helpful, and that'll help you guide you to your next or maybe first vintage watch purchase. Thank you so much for sticking around for another episode of Federico Talks Watches. Please don't forget to like and subscribe if you found it useful, and take a look at the description of this video for a link to my Instagram account. That way you guys can get some great watch content even on the days when I'm not uploading. Thank you so much, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Take care.